The reflection in the darkened window of our penthouse suite told a story my heart refused to believe. My hand, pale against the crisp silk of my blouse, rested on the cheek of the man I called my husband, Carter. His jaw was tense beneath my fingers, a faint, silvery scar catching the low light from the city below. He was beautiful, intense, a masterpiece of masculine sorrow and quiet strength. But the reflection showed a different man. It showed his face, but smoother, unscarred, the mouth twisted into a cruel, triumphant smirk I'd never seen before. And beside him a woman with a diamond choker and eyes like shards of ice, laughing at a joke I couldn't hear. That was the ghost, the man he used to be, and I, the fool who had married the lie, was just beginning to understand the price of his resurrection. It started 6 months ago, on a night that felt as gray and tired as my soul. I was a senior partner at one of the most ruthless corporate law firms in the city. My job was to win, to dismantle my opponents with a smile and a stack of meticulously prepared briefs. I was good at it, too good. The thrill had long since curdled into a familiar, grinding boredom. That night, I just secured a hostile takeover that would ruin thousands of lives for the benefit of a handful of billionaires. To celebrate, my colleagues popped a $1,000 bottle of champagne. I slipped out the back door and into the rain-soaked streets. I found him in a dimly lit jazz bar, tucked away in a corner, nursing a whiskey. He wasn't playing the sad sack. He wasn't fishing for sympathy. He was just still. A pool of quiet intensity in a room full of noise. He looked up as I approached, and his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, locked onto mine. There was a weariness in them that mirrored my own, but beneath it something else burned, a fire. "You look like you've just won a war you didn't want to fight," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. I should have walked away. I was a master at building walls, but something in his directness disarmed me. "And you look like you lost one," I replied, sliding onto the stool beside him. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Something like that. He called himself Carter. Over the next few weeks, he became my addiction. He'd appear outside my office or we'd meet for coffee in anonymous cafes. He told me his story in pieces, like a puzzle he was slowly letting me assemble. He'd been a titan of industry, a visionary who'd built a tech empire from scratch. Then his world imploded. His wife Eliza and his best friend Marcus had siphoned his fortune, framed him for fraud, and left him for dead after a conveniently timed accident. He'd woken up in a hospital with a new face, courtesy of a reconstructive surgery paid for with the last of his hidden cash, and no identity. He was a ghost. I, a lawyer who saw deceit for a living, should have been skeptical. But he wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for a handout. He was just there, listening. Understanding the darkness that came from my own line of work. He saw the person behind the power suit, the one who was tired of being a shark in a tank full of other sharks. His vulnerability was raw, his pain a tangible thing, and his desire for justice, it wasn't just about getting his money back. It was deeper, purer. We fell in love in a whirlwind of late-night conversations and shared silences. It was fast, ferocious, and all-consuming. He made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. He saw the fighter in me and admired it instead of fearing it. One evening, we were walking along the river, the city lights glittering on the water like fallen stars. He stopped, turned to me, his expression deadly serious. "I have to ask you something," he said, his voice low. "Something insane." "Try me," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I want them to pay, not just in prison. I want them to lose everything. Their empire, their reputation, their future. I want to erase them." He took my hands, his grip firm. "I can't do it alone. I need a partner. Someone brilliant, ruthless, and who understands the system from the inside. I need you." He wasn't proposing marriage. He was proposing a conspiracy. And God help me, I was tempted. "Show me," I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. He led me back to his sparse, rented apartment. From a hidden compartment in a false-bottomed drawer, he pulled out a single worn photograph. He handed it to me. The man in the picture was handsome, arrogant, with a cold smile and eyes that held no warmth. It was him, but not him. The jaw was square, the nose unbroken. This was the face of the man he used to be, the ghost. "This was Julian," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The man Eliza and Marcus betrayed, the man they think is dead." He looked at me, the fire in his eyes now blazing into an inferno. Carter is the ghost. Julian is the weapon. Marry me, and let's go to war. I didn't say yes with words. I said it with a kiss, hard and desperate on the banks of that rain-slicked river. It was a pact sealed in shadow, a vow that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with vengeance. Our wedding wasn't in a church. It was in a dusty, forgotten courthouse office, with a clerk who barely looked up from his crossword puzzle. The rings were simple platinum bands bought from a pawn shop. They felt heavier than any diamond. They weren't symbols of love. They were manacles, and we both wore them willingly. Our honeymoon suite was a penthouse apartment in a glass tower, leased under a shell corporation I'd created in an afternoon. It wasn't a place of romance. It was a command center. The living room wall was now a grid of monitors, each displaying a different stream of data. Financial reports for Ethereum, the new tech giant Eliza and Marcus had built with Julian's stolen fortune, employee profiles, security camera feeds, news articles. It was a digital spiderweb, and at the center of it all was us. Julian, no, I had to call him Carter now, even in my own head, was a different person in that room. The sadness that had first drawn me in was gone, replaced by a chilling, focused calm. He moved with a predator's grace, his eyes constantly scanning the screens, connecting dots that weren't there for anyone else. He was the general. I was his strategist. Eliza is smart, I said, pointing a laser pen at a complex organizational chart on the main screen. She's insulated Ethereum's core assets behind 3 layers of international holding companies. We can't just sue them. We'd get bogged down in court for a decade, and they'd bleed us dry with countersuits. So we don't attack the core, Carter said, his voice flat. We cut off the head. Not the head, I corrected him. The spine. They have a proprietary algorithm that manages their entire logistics network. It's their secret weapon, the reason they're outperforming competitors. The code is split between 2 senior developers. One is a devout family man, unshakable. The other is Aaron Vance. I pulled up Vance's file, a young, ambitious programmer with a penchant for high-stakes poker and a mountain of credit card debt. He's their weak link, I concluded. He's also the only one with the master key to the entire algorithm. If we get his access, we can not only steal their intellectual property, we can corrupt it, send their entire supply chain into a tailspin from the inside. Carter looked at the screen, then at me. A slow, cold smile spread across his face. It was the first time I'd seen that expression, and it sent a shiver down my spine. And how do we persuade Mr. Vance to cooperate? We don't, I said, my own voice dropping to match his. We create a situation where he has no other choice. I've found an old SEC investigation into one of his previous employers. It was closed for lack of evidence, but I suspect Vance was involved in some creative accounting. We can resurrect it, make it look like the feds are closing in. He'll be desperate. Carter nodded, his eyes gleaming. Desperate men make mistakes, and I'm very good at being there when they do. The plan was set in motion. 2 days later, an anonymous tip traced through a dozen proxies to a burner phone we'd destroyed landed on the desk of an ambitious junior SEC agent. The investigation into Aaron Vance's past was reopened. We watched on our monitors as Vance's life began to unravel. Panic calls to his lawyer, sweating through meetings, his credit cards were declined, the walls were closing in. Carter decided it was time to introduce himself. He didn't go to Vance's office. He went to his sanctuary, a high-stakes backroom poker game in the city's financial district. I watched through a hacked feed on a tiny, hidden camera Carter had worn in his lapel. Vance was losing badly, his face pale and slick with sweat. Carter sat down at the table, buying in with a stack of cash that made the other players nervous. He didn't say a word to Vance for an hour. He just played, cold and methodical, bleeding the other men dry. Then, as Vance pushed his last few chips into the pot, Carter leaned in. "Tough month, Aaron," he said, his voice a low murmur, just for the 2 of them. "The SEC can be such a bother." Vance froze, his eyes wide with terror. He looked at Carter, who simply stared back, his expression unreadable. He didn't need to make a threat. His presence was the threat. He was the monster under the bed, the ghost in the machine, the embodiment of every fear that had been keeping Vance awake at night. Vance folded. He lost the hand. He lost everything. An hour later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an encrypted number. It was a single string of code. The master key. We were in. That night, Carter and I stood before the wall of monitors, sipping champagne. On one screen, Ethereum's stock price was holding steady. On another, Aaron Vance was being escorted from his building by security, his face a mask of defeat. "We did it," I whispered, a thrill coursing through me. It was better than winning any hostile takeover. It was righteous. Carter turned to me, his eyes reflecting the glowing screens. He raised his glass. "To the practice run," he said. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and wrong. Practice run? Before I could ask what he meant, he added, "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start on the real list." He turned back to the screens, leaving me standing alone with my champagne and the chilling realization that our war had just begun, and I had no idea who the real enemy was. The phrase "practice run" echoed in my head for the rest of the night, a poison seeping into my veins. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark of the living room, the glow of the monitors painting me in shades of blue and green. Carter slept soundly in the other room, his breathing even and deep. How could he sleep? How could he so calmly dismantle 2 lives and then call it a rehearsal? I, a corporate lawyer who prided herself on emotional detachment, felt like I was going to vibrate out of my own skin. The next morning, he was already at the wall, a fresh cup of coffee in his hand. He acted like nothing was amiss, like he hadn't just dropped a bombshell in the middle of our victory celebration. "Morning," he said, not turning around. "There's coffee." I walked over, my movements stiff. "Who's on the list, Carter?" He finally turned, a faint, amused smile playing on his lips. "Eager. I like that." He tapped a screen and a new file appeared. It was a man I didn't recognize, middle-aged, balding, with a weak chin and the kind of face that blends into a crowd. His name was Robert Thorne. "Who is he?" I asked. "Robert Thorne," Carter said, his voice casual. 10 years ago, he was a mid-level accountant at my first company. He embezzled about $50,000. I caught him, fired him, and pressed charges. He served 2 years, lost his house, his wife, his kids. Last I heard, he was managing a sporting goods store in a town a few hundred miles from here. I stared at the file, then at him. $50,000? You built an empire worth billions. This is what you call a real target? This is nothing. "It's not about the money," Carter said, his eyes hardening. The charming vulnerability was gone, replaced by that cold, calculating fire. "It's about the principle. He stole from me. He broke a trust, and he got away with it. He got to walk away and start a new life, while I had to deal with the consequences. He's a loose end." "A loose end?" I was incredulous. "He's a man who made a mistake a decade ago. This isn't justice, Carter. This is extermination. Justice is a concept for the weak," he snapped, his voice sharp as glass. "I prefer finality. Thorne is first. We're going to ruin him. Not financially. He has nothing to ruin. We're going to ruin his reputation. Frame him for a much larger crime at that sporting goods store, something that will ensure he never works again. That he dies alone and forgotten." He looked at me, expecting me to jump into action, to start building the legal framework for this man's destruction. He saw a weapon. He saw a tool. He didn't see a wife who was suddenly terrified of the man she'd married. "I need some air," I said, my voice tight. I turned and walked out before he could respond. I didn't go for a walk. I went to my old office. It was Saturday, but I still had my keys. I let myself into the silent, sterile building and went straight to my terminal. I was a partner. I had access to databases, to private investigators, to resources that went far beyond the public internet. I needed to know who I had married. I needed to verify his story. First, I looked up the car accident. The police report was there, just as he described it, a high-speed collision on a coastal highway. Julian Thorne's car. A burnt-out shell. A body, charred beyond recognition, identified by dental records. Case closed. It was clean. Too clean. Then I dug into Eliza and Marcus. Their rise had been meteoric, funded by a series of anonymous venture capital investments that, with enough digging, I could trace back to shell corporations. They were corrupt, no doubt, but they were also small-time sharks compared to the monster I was living with. My hands trembled as I typed in a new search. Julian Thorne, psychological profile, pre-accident. I used a backdoor I knew into a secure medical database, searching for any records. I found nothing. But then I tried a different angle, searching for sealed court records, and I found something. A civil suit, filed and then quietly withdrawn a year before the accident. It was from a former business associate of Julian's, a man named Alistair Finch. The details were sparse, but the affidavit was chilling. Finch accused Julian of systematic psychological torture, of manipulating him into a series of bad business deals that left him bankrupt and on the verge of suicide. The suit was withdrawn, most likely due to an out-of-court settlement and a gag order. But the description of Julian's methods was terrifying. It wasn't about revenge. It was about control. About the joy of breaking another human being. I leaned back in my chair, the blood draining from my face. Carter's story about being betrayed was a lie. Or at least it wasn't the whole truth. He wasn't a victim. He was a predator. And Eliza and Marcus hadn't betrayed him. They had probably tried to escape him. The car accident wasn't an attempt on his life. It was him, faking his own death to start over, to become a more efficient ghost. I was his partner, his wife. I had given him my skills, my resources, my love. I had handed a serial killer the perfect weapon and taught him how to aim. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Carter. "Miss you. When are you coming home? We have work to do." I stared at the words, a cold dread washing over me. I wasn't his partner. I was his next project. And if I wasn't careful, I would end up just like Robert Thorne, or worse, like the man in the photograph, the ghost he used to be. I walked back into the penthouse, not as a wife, but as a spy. Every nerve ending was on fire, screaming at me to run, to never look back. But where would I go? I was an accessory to the destruction of two major corporations. My fingerprints were all over the shell companies, the anonymous tips, the digital breadcrumbs that led to their ruin. Carter had built his cage around me with my own skills. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city. He didn't turn when I came in. "Feel better?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. "Much," I lied, forcing a lightness into my tone I didn't feel. "Just needed to clear my head. All this, it's exhilarating, but intense." He turned, and his eyes, those stormy sea eyes, scanned my face. He wasn't looking for love or reassurance. He was looking for cracks, for hesitation. He was a jeweler examining a diamond for flaws, and I was terrified he'd find one. "Good," he said, his expression unreadable. "Because I need you at your best. Robert Thorne." He gestured to the screen. "I've outlined the approach. We frame him for skimming from the store's inventory and selling it online. I've already created a dark web vendor profile in his name. We just need to plant the evidence on his work computer and seed a few transactions." He looked at me, waiting. This was the test. My chance to prove I was still the ruthless partner he thought I'd married. I had to pass. I walked to the screen, my mind racing. I looked at his plan. It was crude, effective, and left too many digital traces. It was sloppy. "It's a good start," I said, adopting the cool, analytical tone I used in the boardroom. "But it's amateur. If anyone does a real forensic audit, they'll see the planted files were created yesterday. We need to be smarter." For the first time, I saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He hadn't expected a critique. He'd expected compliance. "Show me," he challenged. I spent the next 2 hours showing him. I showed him how to backdate the digital files, how to embed them in old system logs to make them look like they'd been there for months. I showed him how to use Thorne's own IP address for the fake online sales, but through a series of lagging proxies that would make it look like a sophisticated attempt to cover his tracks, not a crude frame-up. I was so deep in the game, so focused on the technical details, that for a moment, I almost forgot why I was doing it. I was good at this. And that realization was more terrifying than anything Carter could ever do to me. When I was done, he was silent for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. "That's why I married you," he said, and for a horrifying second, I felt a flicker of pride. He wasn't complimenting me. He was admiring his favorite tool. That night, I waited until his breathing was deep and even. Then I slipped out of bed and went to the command center. I didn't turn on the main lights, just the glow of a single monitor. I was the ghost in his machine now. I created a new hidden partition on the server, encrypted with a password only I knew. I named it Pandora. Into this box, I started copying everything. His plans for Thorne, the original files on Eliza and Marcus, the shell corporation structures I had built. I was building my own case, my own spiderweb. I needed leverage. I needed proof. Then I went back to the file on Alistair Finch, the man who had tried to warn the world about Julian Thorne. I used a secure, anonymized browser to find him. It took me 3 hours, but I found him. He was living a quiet life in a small town in Vermont, a freelance software consultant. His online presence was minimal. He was hiding. I couldn't call him. It was too risky. But I could send him a message, something only he would understand. I drafted an email from a burner account. The subject line was the case number from his old sealed lawsuit. The body of the email contained only 2 words: "He's back." I stared at the send button, my finger hovering over the mouse. This was it, the point of no return. If I sent this, I was actively working against my husband. I was picking a side in a war I hadn't even known I was fighting. I clicked send. A wave of nausea and relief washed over me. The next morning, Carter was more energized than I'd ever seen him. He was practically buzzing. "Thorne is in motion," he announced, "but he's just the appetizer." He swiped on the screen, and a new file came up. A distinguished-looking man with silver hair and a kind face. My blood ran cold. I knew that face. It was Judge Marcus Davies. He was a legend in the legal community, a man known for his unimpeachable integrity. He was also the judge who had presided over the Alastair Finch civil suit, the one that was withdrawn. "Why him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because he was the one who let Finch get away with it," Carter snarled, the mask of Carter slipping completely, revealing the monster beneath. He could have exposed me then. He could have stopped me. But he took the payoff. He looked the other way. He enabled my escape, and for that he has to pay. We're not just going to ruin his reputation. We're going to frame him for taking a massive bribe in a current case. We'll send him to prison for the rest of his life. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a fanatical light. This is the big one. This will send a message, and you, my love, are going to be the one to deliver the evidence to the authorities. You're a respected lawyer. They'll believe you. He was setting me up to be the instrument of a good man's destruction. He was going to use my credibility, my career, as the weapon to destroy one of the most respected judges in the country. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that if I refused, I would be the next name on his list. I looked at the judge's face on the screen, a man whose career was built on the very concept of justice Carter was so determined to pervert. My mind was a battlefield, but my face had to be a mask of compliance. I couldn't let him see the revulsion, the terror, or the nascent plan forming in the wreckage of my loyalty. "A brilliant move," I said, my voice steady. I turned from the screen to face him, forcing a smile that felt like cracking glass. Using me as the messenger is the perfect touch. My reputation is the ultimate credibility boost. He watched me, his head tilted slightly, like a scientist observing a specimen. "I knew you'd understand. We're not just destroying him. We're making the system itself the instrument of his downfall. It's poetic." "It is," I agreed, my mind racing. "But your current plan is messy. Planting physical evidence is a relic. It's too risky, too many points of failure. If we're going to do this, we do it perfectly, digitally. We create a trail so convincing, so airtight that the judge himself won't be able to deny it." I was walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. One wrong word, one hint of hesitation, and I would fall. "Show me," he said again, the same challenge as before. But this time, the stakes were infinitely higher. For the next day, I worked. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. I sat at the command center, my fingers flying across the keyboard, with Carter hovering over my shoulder. I was building the frame of a lifetime. I created a series of encrypted emails between a shell account I designed to look like it belonged to a defense contractor and an account I spoofed to be the judge's. The emails discussed a massive bribe to influence a landmark antitrust case Davies was presiding over. I fabricated offshore bank records, showing a 7-figure payment into an account held by a shell corporation controlled by the judge's estranged son. I wove a narrative of greed and coercion, every digital thread meticulously crafted to be indelible and damning. Carter watched, impressed, as I built his masterpiece. "The beauty of it," I explained, my voice a monotone of concentration, "is the trigger. We don't just leak this. We embed a logic bomb in the court's digital filing system. When the final verdict in the antitrust case is entered, it will automatically trigger an anonymous email to the FBI's cybercrime division, containing everything. The timing will be perfect, the verdict will be announced, and minutes later, the judge will be exposed. It's a self-destructing weapon." He was captivated. He saw the elegance, the cold, digital perfection of it. He didn't see the poison I had embedded in the heart of his plan. The logic bomb wasn't just a trigger. It was a transmitter. And it wouldn't just send the evidence of the judge's crime. It would send a second, hidden data packet. A packet containing the full, unencrypted story of Julian Thorne. The original police report from his fake death, the financial records of his new identity, the Alastair Finch lawsuit, and everything in my Pandora box. It was a Trojan horse, and Carter himself had helped me build it. The night before the verdict was to be announced, Carter was ecstatic. He poured 2 glasses of expensive whiskey, his face alight with the fire of imminent victory. "To the end of an era," he toasted, clinking his glass against mine. "To the death of Judge Marcus Davies. And to us." "To us," I echoed, the whiskey burning a path down my throat. "You know," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "I was worried about you for a day or two. After Thorne, I thought you might be getting soft, but this is the work of a true partner, a true artist." I didn't respond. I just looked at him, at the man I had married, the ghost I had tried to love. He wasn't just a monster. He was a narcissist who had fallen in love with his own reflection in my eyes. "What happens after?" I asked, my voice quiet. "After Davies, what's next on the list?" He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that was more terrifying than any of his cold stares. "The list is endless, my love. There are so many people who need to be corrected. But first, we celebrate. We watch Davies fall. Then we disappear. New faces, new identities. We can be anyone we want to be." He reached out to touch my cheek, the same way I had touched his on that first night in the penthouse. But this time, I didn't lean into it. I held his gaze. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Julian," I said, his real name a bullet in the quiet room. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by a sudden, sharp comprehension. His hand froze in midair. He knew. He saw it all in my face. The betrayal. The trap. "You," he breathed, his voice low and dangerous. "What did you do?" "I did exactly what you taught me to do," I said, standing up, putting the command center table between us. "I found a weakness. I exploited it. I built the perfect weapon." He lunged, but I was ready. I kicked the rolling chair hard, sending it crashing into his legs. He stumbled, and I grabbed my phone from the table. "It's already done," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "The verdict came in 10 minutes ago. The logic bomb has detonated. The FBI has everything, the frame job on the judge, and the entire story of Julian Thorne, including the location of this penthouse." He stared at me, his face a contortion of fury and disbelief. The monster was unmasked, raw and ugly. He was no longer the charming, vulnerable Carter or the calculating ghost. He was just a man who had lost control. "You stupid bitch," he snarled, advancing on me. "You think they can stop me? I'll be gone before they get through the door." "No, you won't," a new voice said from the doorway. We both turned. Standing there was Alastair Finch, looking pale but resolute. Behind him, 2 FBI agents, guns drawn, filled the doorway. Finch looked at Carter, at the monster who had ruined his life. "He's back," Finch said, the words from my email now a reality. "And this time, he's not getting away." Carter's eyes darted from the agents to me, a final desperate calculation. He saw the windows, the balconies, the dozen ways he could try to escape. But he also saw the look on my face. He saw that I had outplayed him, that his perfect weapon, his partner, had become his undoing. The fight went out of him, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. As they handcuffed him, he looked at me one last time. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, just a chilling, curious respect. "Well played," he said, a faint, cruel smile touching his lips. "You really are the best." They led him away, and the silence that fell over the penthouse was deafening. It was over. I had won, but as I stood there, alone in the wreckage of my marriage, I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a survivor. I had married a ghost seeking revenge, and in the process, I had become one myself. I had looked into the abyss, and I had used its own darkness to fight back. But the abyss doesn't let you go. It just becomes a part of you. And now I had to learn to live with the ghost I had become.